This is mental health training for refugees and asylum seekers. I'm Anthea, a psychotherapist working for Solace, surviving exile and persecution. These were the original objectives for the training: to understand the emotional health of refugees and asylum seekers, to understand Solace's therapeutic care approach and how to refer those clients to us, some strategies for your work with refugees and asylum seekers, awareness of issues of working with these clients and self-care, but that bit of the training wasn't delivered. And then finally, signposting and safeguarding these clients to other organisations. So the training session involves some science about emotional health and trauma, strategies for working with traumatised people, and the work I'm doing in Kirklees. I offer follow-up calls to anyone who thinks something personally they'd like to talk about has been stirred up and they'd like to talk about it, and that's my email address. In this presentation, I'm using the term clients to identify the people I work with, and emotional health as a positive reference to try and avoid stigmatizing and labeling people. And this training was prepared sort of not knowing what experience people had already had. So whilst you're reading through this PowerPoint, listening to the training, I wonder if you can find a little bit of space to be here, away from your demands, especially in COVID times. Taking 2 deep breaths into the stomach area with nice long out breaths. And notice any tension in your body and just gently try and release it. You're in the front line. West Yorkshire and Harrogate Healthcare Partnership has identified that frontline workers must be protected, listened to their fears, mentoring, training, protection. And I do offer ongoing support to other professionals as part of my role at Solace. And let's start with a little thought exercise using empathy. It's the single most useful skill you can use with any client. And so can you think of 5 things you would feel living in a new country? Empathy needs a bit of work. It involves imagination. It's about being curious about somebody's situation, listening, and imagining as if that were me, as if me. Not it's happening to me, but being alongside someone as if that were me. And that as if, it protects yourself. So it's about being curious, saying, tell me, describe that. Or just watch a short YouTube clip.
Raindrops on roses, it whispers on kittens, brown paper pack.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So for some first thoughts about the context. Many people cope with the challenges of being in another country. And I generally start from two premises: to be open and curious to the richness of race, culture and custom, and to try and not have preconceived ideas of problems, what their problems may be. And increasingly in these times to be aware of my own racial and ethnic heritage and how that impacts on another person, how I may be experienced by the client. Who am I to them? Authority? Following the Black Lives Matter campaigning, we're just becoming aware of white privilege and how often relationships are taking place within a white space, white procedures and culture. And it's important to be reflective of our own unconscious biases. Remember, there may also be great stigma and fear attached to mental illness. Working with traumatized people and migration issues, I'm respectful that people we meet may have had a variety of stressful experiences and may now be living with the consequences of that. As professionals, we need to be aware of what has happened. There may have been pre-migration trauma, which could in some cases lead to post-traumatic stress, shame, loss, insecurity. But also we need to be aware of what's happening now, post-migration stresses, stress after arriving. And my current research leads me to see these as possible post-migration stressors. I'll just let you read that. And some of these don't just disappear after gaining status. Some of these continue. So objective 1, understanding emotional health, stress and trauma. So I always start from this idea that the body is an amazing thing with amazing power to heal. And this is just a natural function. Healing is very natural. We all have some resilience. Most people show resilience. Most people show a desire for a positive future. And these internal resources can be built on. People generally, all of us, have developed protector or coping part selves. Perhaps we can think of stressful times when we've all overcome. One of the most important things to do, first of all, is to normalize any physical and emotional symptoms of stress and trauma. And that's the first step to recovery. And you can visibly see people, sort of, their bodies show relief that, oh, this is normal. So that gives them hope. This is how I think it's important to see the difference between stress and trauma. Stress is a sense of demand beyond which we can feel that we can cope. Like just one thing, then another thing, one thing after another. What next? Can I cope with this? And then the responses to that, the stress responses, are a series of normal bodily responses to try and sort of keep us up to speed with it, try and help us to cope. Trauma, the Greek meaning being wound, damage, can be thought of as a sense of something greater, a greater perceived threat over which we had no control, or we felt we had no control. There's some damage, and that requires healing. The stress response following trauma is more sustained and involves, it's kind of like something stuck. It involves reliving the same thing, whatever happened, over and over, the same thing over. So stress is just one thing after another. Trauma is the same thing. It's there all the time. What is the stress response? Stress is a way we respond when we feel under pressure or when we can't handle everything we need to do. It's a conditional feeling experience when we think the demands on us will be too great. And our bodies are built to deal with this in two ways. As most of you will have heard, the fight or flight. Fight or run away. And the fight or flight response is triggered by the amygdala, which is two tiny little bits down here in the bottom of the brain. And it's like a smoke detector. It's like an alarm, a little alarm in the brain. And it's linked to the limbic system and sends a signal to the sympathetic nervous system down here. And then we have these bodily responses like pupils dilating, breathing fast. We quickly get a lot of glycogen transferred to glucose to give us energy. So that's all those responses. And there's a feeling of adrenaline and energy. The parasympathetic nervous system should kick in after the stress, and that's the sort of calming down. So the opposite things happen. Heartbeat slows down, breathing slows. And these processes kind of happen all the time. Sometimes they need a little bit of help. We need to actively make an effort to calm down. When the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system overload or flood, we get a slightly different response, a freezing or a collapse. And that's when we're not quite sure how this happens. It could be extreme danger. It could be when you perceive you can't get away or you can't fight. Or it could be just automatically triggered. And then the ultimate emergency system of the body kicks in. The reptilian brain is activated. Metabolism reduces to the point where we disengage, lose awareness, collapse, freeze. Everything gets shut down and immobilized. And this can happen during extreme stress or trauma.
This tactic is of little use, especially since the opossum can't run fast enough to hide very far away. Just as the second coyote senses that a meal is at hand, her mate appears to have lost his appetite. Most predators need the stimulation of resistance to incite them to kill, and the act of killing to induce them to eat. An inert body inspires little interest. But the possum is still breathing, and in fact, it's only playing dead, playing possum. Biding time until the threat of danger is past. It's not just consciously putting on a good act, however. It actually goes into a state similar to shock, a condition known as thanatosis. The coyotes are fooled into searching for livelier prey, while gradually, as it senses that the coast is clear, the opossum comes out of its trance and goes about its steady, deliberate way.
And that same mechanism is in us. That happens to animals in the wild, you know, extreme threat and that kind of shutdown, that freeze. Predators lose interest. So all this is normal. All these stress responses are very normal and protective ultimately. But we don't want something called a prolonged stress or exposure to traumatic events that can have that harmful after effects. Then some work needs to be done to reduce stress and to reset everything, to reset bodily processes. So a brief thought exercise. When did you last feel stressed? What did you do? How did you calm down? These are the symptoms of stress on the sympathetic hyperarousal side, when everything kicks into gear. I'll just let you read that. These are some of the behavioural symptoms of stress. What kind of behaviours follow? Prolonged stress. And these are the longer term consequences of prolonged stress, which we want to try and avoid. So just a summary at this point, demands felt too much for what we can cope with can cause bodily responses we know as stress responses. These are normal in the short term, functional, but need addressing if they continue. So back to trauma. What is trauma again? It's like a wound, Greek word for wound. It can be thought of as something greater, a greater perceived stress, threat, like the possum, over which you felt no control, which is damaged and requires healing. And the stress response then, following trauma, is more sustained, and something is stuck, something keeps being relived, the same thing over and over, that experience reliving. Something was so overwhelming that the mind is unable to process it and integrate and move on and reset. Different types of trauma: single, just one thing, unexpected, out of the blue; a series of events, hearing about something happened to somebody else, military combat, rape, assault, torture, violent attack, kidnap, death. Could involve harm deliberately inflicted by other humans with an uneven power dynamic. It's exacerbated when it's repetitive, prolonged, cumulative, inescapable. Early relationship trauma, very common, can happen when children are neglected, abused, or their emotional needs are not met adequately. But I heard a trauma expert recently saying everybody experiences some misalignment, some early relationship trauma in some form. Professionals exposed to working with traumatized people can experience it vicariously or secondhand. Thought exercise: what's your fears, difficulties already, experiences of working with traumatized people? And you may have heard of something called post-traumatic stress disorder. It has an official criteria, diagnosis. Traumatic stress is the most extreme form of stress. It requires exposure to an event which is perceived as threatening to your own life or body, remember. Experiencing or witnessing violence to another. This is the criteria in the DSM. Learning about the violence or violent death of a relative or close associate. It's generally linked to feelings of loss of control, feeling trapped. There was nothing I could do. It's usual to experience post-traumatic stress symptoms after such an event for several weeks or months. But if it prevents you living a more normal life, job, seeing people, it becomes a disorder. Symptoms: negative moods and emotions, loss of control, shame. And I think the third one is a common one: internal anxiety, a feeling of what is happening to me, falling apart. Negative thoughts of the world, inability to experience joy, feeling detached, isolated, estranged, and often inability to recall, to remember key features of the trauma. And this kind of stuckness, this re-experiencing, feels very intrusive. It's like you don't want it. You can feel fine and then suddenly be triggered. Or it's more of a feeling of something in the body that's just there. And the re-experience is either by the odd quick image, intrusive fragmented images, not a coherent memory, but an image, nightmares, flashbacks, which are more like an absolute feeling of being back there at the time, and a disconnect then with being here in the present. Continued emotional distress that seems stuck, hypervigilance, a kind of and not feeling safe, feeling watchful. Prolonged physiological symptoms of fight, flight, and stress, like fast heart rate. And that's the kind of thing that can lead to physiological illness. Back to the DSM criteria. The duration must be more than 1 month for a diagnosis. Person must show significant distress, functional impairment in one or more area of life, job, social. And it must be somehow not related to another illness, a physical illness, or medicine or substance abuse. Back to the brain. And this can happen when trauma is over, the fight-flight response inhibited, and the body resets. And then, if all goes well, everything can get processed with the help of this little organ here called the hypothalamus. I'm sorry, the hippocampus, slightly longer one there. Okay, and that's how memories get processed. Thoughts, images can safely get stored away in other areas of the brain. And that's where we get a sense of our history, our narrative history. But often, and this is the problem, when trauma is happening and this kind of ferocious stress response kicks in, I just want to show you with my hands. This bit here is the front of our brain. This bit here, the thinking bit. And during stress or trauma, during extreme stress or trauma, the front bit, I'm just trying to get it in the camera, the front bit of the brain flips up like that, goes offline, so you're not thinking. Everything's happening here, nothing's happening here. So you're not thinking, you're not processing. And that's due in part to the hippocampus shutting down, not doing its job. Everything being equal, normal memories are either explicit, you can remember facts, events, you can memorize something, or memories are often implicit in that you learn to do something or be with somebody. And that's a little bit more unconscious and a little bit more to do with emotions, sensations, movements, riding a bike, automatic procedures. And these are often described as bodily memories, somatic memories. How to be with someone, what it's like to do that, driving. Traumatic memories are coded differently to normal memories. And due to that hippocampus shutdown, they're not processed in the normal way, like narrative memory is. With the beginning, this is how it started, this is what happened, that's how it ended, that doesn't happen. They're kind of there, but they've got all fragmented. And sometimes they're not even accessible as a neurological memory. They're more a somatic, a bodily memory. They can be felt somewhere else in the body. They've made an imprint, sometimes in the mind, but sometimes in the body. If someone was trapped and responded with a sense of helplessness and horror, the memory is unlikely to be processed in the usual way and remains fragmented. Thus, the various memory components, including the visual images of the time, the feelings at the time, the bodily sensations, thoughts, and behaviors, can all get disconnected from each other due to that flipping effect and from their own consciousness. So instead of a coherent memory of the traumatic event, the imprints are out of conscious awareness. And I guess that's where the therapeutic work is, to try and make some connections back. There's also something called disassociation, which is similar to that freeze response. During trauma, a process can cause a disconnect between a person's thoughts, memory, and identity. It's on a continuum from losing time, feeling of, well, I have no idea what happened in those 2 hours, to a fragmentation of the personality, a splitting of selves, and that can result in something called dissociation identity disorder, portrayed in the film Split with James McAvoy. And that can even lead to people actively being different people in their lives. Sometimes one person and then another person kicks in. Such is the dissociation that strong. However, that process is partly a normal process. We all have partly split selves, part selves. We often have a vulnerable self, a childlike self, and a protector self, and lots of variants of that. Some trauma specialists work directly in this way to work with different part selves. PTSD and long-term consequences. As you know now, PTSD means trauma is live in the limbic system, body and mind. You can actually see it in people's face, bodily posture or restlessness. If you know what to look for, you can see it. Physical health is impacted due to continued stress response, continuous cortisol production, leading to long-term health conditions. Family relationships can be affected. Family members may become anxious, angry, frustrated, and it may interfere with normal functioning, like social activities or employment. I'll just let you have a little look at this, symptoms of trauma. So I guess that was the pre-migration stuff. Also been researching post-migration feeling states. And there's a lot around people not feeling safe for lots of different reasons. People don't feel safe when they're traumatized. Trauma has become encoded in the body and they're reliving danger. But also there's a sort of feeling of not feeling safe because you're in a new country. And worries about, your status in that country, not feeling safe in a confusing new system. Other feelings, bereavement, I mean, that may not come initially. There can be a kind of honeymoon period at first or a good period at first. Then the bereavement can come a little bit after. Discrimination and hostility, shame, embarrassment, language barriers, and a kind of need to be understood, but a frustration of not being heard and understood. Powerlessness, sense of what was done, was out of my control, but also feeling powerless in a new country. And internal feelings of falling apart. So quick check-in. I'm hoping at this point you have a better understanding of stress as a normal response, and a sense of trauma and the consequences of trauma, and a sense of some of the issues affecting this client group. Objective 2 is to try and explain a little bit about Solace, its therapeutic care approach, how to refer clients to us. That's a direct link to our referral form for Kirklees. The other thing is we get client referrals from the White House, so you can suggest people, if they're registered at the White House, contact their GP there. We get referrals from Dash and Reach, so we do get referrals from other organisations. Solace prioritises safe trauma practice, psychoeducation, a little bit like I've been explaining to you today. Grounding, stress management techniques, building internal coping mechanisms and external coping, linking up with other people. And to some extent, the technical stuff, the trauma processing techniques. But clients really have to be ready for that. And I guess often it's fair to say asylum seekers may not be, because then they're not stable enough. They're not a sense of safety yet. So I like to think of it as a holistic therapeutic care approach rather than pure therapy. Creating safety, dealing with the pre-migration trauma, creating resources to cope with post-migration stresses, helping adapt to life, coping with the loss of home, connecting with social networks. And during social restrictions, we've continued with one-to-one telephone therapy, using conference calls with interpreters, visual virtual therapy, Zoom calls, group Zoom sessions, stress management sessions, emotional health training and support, such as I'm doing now. And we have a well-developed family and well-being service for work with resettled Syrian families, which is still going ahead, working in schools with families. Safe trauma work. It's all about strengthening feelings of safety in the client. And that almost certainly means not talking too much about traumatic experiences until there's a readiness, because it's just too much. It's just too overloading and triggering. And it's about being able to spot symptoms of, that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, hyperarousal, sympathetic nervous system, hypoarousal, kind of shutting down, parasympathetic nervous system. Too much on either is not good. You want balance, something in the middle. And this is the middle bit here. If you look, window of tolerance, this is where you need people to be, which is probably where you are at the minute. If you're feeling fairly calm, you're thinking. I call this the green zone, where we want people to be. The hyperarousal is agitation, uncomfortable. It comes out in your body, too much energy, talking too fast, maybe getting sweaty. And if people are in that kind of area, you want techniques to calm them down. Hypoarousal, if people are really kind of getting very sleepy and was thinking going to sleep or passing out, you don't want people to be there. You want to waken up the system a little bit, get back to the green zone. So that's the safe area to do work. Creating safety seems to be something really important, and it is, particularly for therapeutic work. So what makes you feel safe? When did you feel safe? When do you feel safe? Ways of facilitating safety. Safety really should be built from the strength of the relationship between you and the client, from trust, client sensing you're okay, there's no danger here, you're reliable, you do what you say, you're always there at the same time, same place. The predictability, and there are boundaries, knowing when you can be contacted, when you can't be. And not so much now, but creating a safe space, environment, no interruptions. And on the phone or Zoom, it's been about trying to recreate that sort of safety, either online, trying to encourage a client to find a space in their own home that feels safe, and likewise on the phone. And you need to put the brakes on if people are overstimulated, if people are telling their story and it's all coming out too quick, brakes on, stop. And unless you have to hear their story, and then that's going to have to be managed and dechunked and in a calm way. So look for signs of hyperarousal, tears, crying. I know you might sort of think, shouldn't stop people crying. It's maybe good for them, but it may not be. It might be overload. It might just be too much. Talking too fast, red face, aggression, or hypoarousal, pale, sleepy. Because the human trauma system is like a pressure cooker. It just builds and builds, and you don't want to stoke it. So we're always wanting to work to reduce pressure rather than increase it. Some of the work we do then is to try and, do some visualization work. And using the 5 senses is good. So if you sort of think of a place together, maybe create it together, imagine it, go there in your mind, use your 5 senses, what do you see, If it's a sea, do you smell the salt? You can draw it or just imagine it. You could think of a place that people know, but sometimes that can be upsetting if it's a place where they're no longer able to go. A protector figure or wise figure is a nice sound, kind of visual image for somebody to have, somebody who they felt safe with. And there's a technique we're trained in to tap in the kind of safe feelings from positive visualization, sort of butterfly tapping, left, right, bilateral stimulation, tapping in. And a really important, I think, particularly early on with a client, is the psychoeducation, like I've been doing today. Normalizing, what you're feeling is what you're feeling now, and it's a response. It doesn't mean to say you're always going to feel like this. And this can just, as I said to you earlier, bring that relief and that sense of there's hope. I'm not always going to feel like this. Can reduce the shame of that this is just happening to me. I'm going mad, I'm going crazy, I'm falling apart. Information about the symptoms enables people to recognize them, maybe when they come on, how to anticipate them, do they get early signs, what they mean, and lots of ways to manage the symptoms. And that's really important, I think, to getting back some control. It's possible people can be surprised to think, I can get into a state, but I can come back. I can actually control it. Because all you're doing ultimately is assisting that dual process, that arousal and breaks. And it's possible to have control over that. And I've found grounding techniques really, really beneficial because they can be done anytime. So you can do grounding on a walk. What do you see? What do you smell? What are people doing? What's it like to touch the grass or feel the sun on your face? Remembering tastes. So they're very, very useful. And they're quite good if clients want to do this after a nightmare, have some things around them to bring them back to the present, away from the feeling of they're back there with the trauma, which is often what the nightmare's been about, to, no, I'm here. Can feel my duvet, looking around the room, and it's 2 o'clock. Those kind of things to get back in the present. And it's very easy to do anything like that with anybody, to bring that hyperarousal down. So grounding techniques are so easy and so safe and so effective. As I say, useful for nightmares. Taking the edge off. I mean, often people say, well, I still couldn't sleep. But you'd hope, if they practiced and got a little bit better, the time then could go from 2 hours before they slept, again to, bringing it down, taking the edge off that hyperarousal. Mantras are good. I'm here. It's Monday, 2nd of October. And as I look around, there's no threats, no danger, and I'm safe. Anchors, like carrying something around, something comforting, soothing, soft or meaningful. Thinking of a comforting person, animal, friend. Focusing on bodily sensations, which is a little bit of an extension of the grounding. And I always encourage people to start doing that, in their normal life when they're cooking, to be very present, to savor the smells and when they're eating. Walk in nature is a good one. So developing these various sensory and imagery-based techniques are so important. And it's kind of, they're easy as well. It's not technical, it's not a mystery, it's not dangerous, and they're good for anybody to do. So work is important to instill a greater sense of the present, being here, now, and the body responds to that, to counteract the reliving aspects of trauma. And so, yes, so stress management is just an extension of that, really. And we have stress management groups. We have a stress management expert, kind of body expert. And breathing kind of underpins everything. And then there's the 7-11 principle is just make the out breath a little bit longer. So it could be 6-10, but in breath into the tummy and slightly longer out breath. Progressive muscle relaxation. So we have a specialist on that who can sort of take you all through the muscle groups, progressively tensing and releasing. Mindfulness, a little bit of mindfulness practice in session is good, and meditation. And the guided visual imagery can be very effective. And of course, we're looking to strengthen what's there in the client. The client will already have internal coping strategies. These could be spiritual or memories, positive memories. Times when they felt stronger. It's possible to, when you remember that, your body remembers that feeling of being stronger. Things that people already do can be built on. New things, keeping cognitively active, focusing, creative, interpersonal, building relationships, even to just one person, pets, family, friends, becoming a little bit more body aware. I mean, that can be difficult for people who are traumatized, that don't really want to be in their body. So that's kind of one with caution, to be done slowly. But trying to connect a little bit more. So working with somebody with their body is very effective, even if that just means, I've noticed something about your face. What happens if you change that? So working with the body in that way. Psychological resources, as I say, positive memories, trying to get people a little bit in more touch, connecting up, what do you feel? Where do you feel that, when you talk about that anxiety, some people might say, well, it's like a twisting here on my chest, almost like a twisting feeling or squeezing. Lots of coping strategies some people already have, for some people, taking a shower, encouraging lots of different ways of kind of adding to their own coping strategies, things that are available. And I do think in Kirklees we've got an outstanding voluntary sector offering lots and lots of activities that can be tapped into. That's part of the work I'm doing now, to have a look at that. Ecotherapy, there is S2R space, which encourages the outdoor connecting opportunities, assist people getting into work with refugee status. And then the trauma processing is the specialized bit. So most of our therapists are trained in at least one trauma processing technique, and some a little bit more advanced than others. I have training in quite a basic one called emotional freedom technique, or tapping. We have an amazing pain and trauma therapist specializing in cranial sacral therapy. Some therapists do EMDR, rapid eye movement. We have a hypnotherapist, trauma-focused CBT, rewind specialist, and some people try narrative exposure therapy. Sorry, that should be. So I'm trained, and one of my colleagues is trained in this, EFT, and it's just a basic, gently tapping on certain points in the body. It's incredibly relaxing. So it's absolutely brilliant for hyperarousal, bringing people back to that green, where something at least can be talked through that it wasn't possible to talk through. If it's really working, it's also decoding emotions from neurological pathways, emotions that have got stuck. And that's through a process of depotentiation. So what you're hoping is through the tapping, some new thought, some new connection might be made safely, or a new memory. So you can do it without words, just for kind of relaxation, or it can be quite effective just to use keywords as you tap. And the keywords can directly get into something. You know, what one word can produce a torrent of emotions. And if that happens, you can just keep tapping through it. So strategies for your work, and I am offering follow-up training, which is kind of a bit more geared for strategies appropriate for your work. But what we did in the training was we looked at these scenarios. They're not real people, they're just a kind of amalgam of different situations that could happen. People could have just been to sign on with the Home Office. Can be quite stressed, but quite distant, withdrawn, very sleepy, you know. So it's sort of thinking about what would you do there? Is she going into hypoarousal? You know, does she need to walk around? Do you need to cancel your session? She needs a biscuit. She got low blood sugar. So sometimes very human responses. You know, it is something biological. Dehydration, low blood sugar. Elise, you know, very distant, not talking, quite hostile actually when you're there to help. Children are in care, but she won't engage with you. You know, is a problem with you? Are you white? Or if you're not, do you represent authority? She's never going to talk to you in a million years. Addy, you know, agitation, unable to sit still. But if you're working with an interpreter, just dismissing you, just fine to talk to the interpreter, but not you, ignoring you, but just kind of preoccupied with pain and the failings of the UK system, the failings of the NHS, can't get an appointment, not getting anywhere forward with it, it never seems to do anything. You know, those sort of situations. Is he hyper aroused? Will he respond? How can you make a sort of bit of psychological contact? Shia, calm but very controlling. You feel controlled. There seems no way for you to join in the conversation. There's no gaps. He explains things calmly, in great detail. He's been very intimidated by neighbours and his family. His family has been physically and verbally abused. You know, how do you handle that? You know, there's no way in, no way to talk, put your side forward. Kia is definitely hyper aroused, laughter, tearfulness, swinging one to the other. Proceeds to tell you about a flight from home, traumatic experiences, just, you know, maybe you feel overwhelmed with everything. Along the way, great detail, the things that have happened to her. She's either laughing or crying, very, very volatile. She's in that hyper arousal state. There's a relief. She wants to tell you and she wants to, but it's not safe. So that hyper arousal needs to be managed. Z is very quiet, seems to be in that green zone, but push a button and he gets very angry when outlining the injustice of his refused asylum claim. You know, what do you do then if you've just pushed that button? Never hears from his solicitor, would like help, but, you know, a bit suspicious of you, not really opening up to you, a little bit hostile. You're just another authority figure. So in the training, we kind of thought about every situation. What would you feel? What would you do? And then some strategies to think about. This might be useful for you to sort of just listen now and then go through again yourself. Number one, you want to be calming, not fueling. You want to try and sort of stay calm inside yourself as best you can. So we're trying to develop trust and safety, which could take time. It could be a matter of building that relationship, but always set boundaries. You know, this is who I am. This is when we're going to meet. This is where we're going to meet. This is how I think I can help, but I can't help with that. Be prepared to stop someone. Do you really need to know their story in all that detail? Maybe you do. Maybe you need to help them with a report. If so, building breaks slowly, grounding. So if discussing traumatic experiences, put in place grounding techniques with the 5 senses. Talk through with them which ones you'll use. Have an anchor. You know, who could you think about just for a few minutes, just to calm down, or you know, can you focus on me a little bit? Can you be with me? And then that can be quite calming. So understand the hyper and the hypo, you know, the different sides of the nervous system and what to look for. When someone is hyper aroused, these exercises can bring them back. Tummy breathing, glass of lemon water, sharpness of the lemon, being present, grounding, body scan. Can you feel your feet on the floor? Can you feel your sit bone on the chair? Can you do a bit of progressive muscle relaxation? Hypoarousal, stand up, walk around, energize, biscuit. Now, these tips for dealing with difficult issues, I'll go through now, and then I've rejigged into a clever little phrase for you. Sometimes maybe, can you just describe what you've noticed about the issue? I notice you're talking to the interpreter, but not to me. Are you comfortable? Is that more comfortable? How can I make you feel more comfortable with me? Describe the impact on you. You know, we've talked about this quite some times now. We're not really getting anywhere. What do you think would help? Consider the other person's perspective, you know, coming back to that idea of empathy. I know this is hard. I know it's really hard to get organized when you're so tired and you've not slept. Put forward thoughts about possible solutions and try to collaborate. I'm wondering if we could think about finding another solution together. So that, if you rejig it, can come out as news, notice, understand, wonder, state. I've noticed we're back at that same problem with accessing a GP appointment. I understand this is frustrating because of the language. I wonder how we could go forward, as it feels we're not really making any progress here. Key tips: speak in a clear, calm voice. You know, if you feel anchored, that should come out in your voice and your body language. Be curious, non-judgmental, explore the issue. Use empathy to communicate understanding. Sometimes maybe just a phrase. I don't have any words. That feels like so much to be carrying. Ask for support from a colleague if needed. Make a plan to get further help if you feel this is beyond me. Stay in contact. And safeguarding. You've probably got your own kind of policies, procedures for safeguarding. So be aware of that, how you would kind of respond. And in a meeting that seemed to be getting a little bit out of control. Maybe you have recording procedures, but maybe that has to be within line with confidentiality. Maybe you do risk assessments. Maybe you have a need to know, you can keep confidentiality with a client, but there's a named person within your organization who you would talk about if you were worried about the person. Contract with a client, what you can keep confidential and what needs to be disclosed. For example, we contract to say, if you're in danger or a child's in danger or a crime's been committed, then we will have to refer this information on, whether that's to adult care, GP, that can all be put in place. Section 42 of the 2014 Care Act requires that local authorities investigate risks to adults. You may have policies that guide you to be alert to the signs of abuse, emotional, e-safety, sexual, financial, criminal. Or with this client group, it could be honor-based, self-harm, suicide, karma nirvana for honor-based worries. And there's an organization for suicide, but it's men. I'll tell you at the end. Oh, it's here, yeah. So for suicide, there's Platform One I've just learned about, but is a men's crisis charity, Karma Nirvana for honor-based abuse. But there's a safeguarding team at Third Sector Leaders, Kirklees Council. So this was the bit of the training that didn't take place. And this is a little bit of signposting. This is, for me, is kind of work in progress, and that I'm just looking at multi-agency building within Kirklees, linking up Solace, myself, to other agencies. So I'm part of a migrant health subgroup, which is the White House Centre Solace and IAPT. There's more information about the asylum process there. There's the new arrivals team and Kirklees Welcome Mentors at Kirklees Council, Dash, Yorkshire Migration Partnership. Some more here, I'll let you have a look. Some you may have heard of. Ashiana is in Sheffield for people who've been trafficked. And that's the next page. There's S2R, create space that I was talking about for ecotherapy. Auntie Pam's is kind of maternity and women's help. Final thoughts. I hope you see now that stress is normal and it's got important survival functions. Symptoms of trauma are actually normal responses to extraordinary events. The body and mind are programmed to recover. New neurological connections are made, and that's the whole idea of neuroplasticity. Safety can be re-established, adjustment is possible. In your work, practice empathy and news. Be curious to race, culture and experience, your own and others, and mindful of issues of white space, things happening in a white space. Be prepared to stop someone with symptoms of hyper or hypoarousal. And hopefully you've understood something about the science about mental health and trauma. You have some strategies for work with traumatized people and the work I'm doing in Kirklees. And those were the original objectives.